I'm Steve Jones, and I'm in front of the Mattaway Centre here in Renfrew, Ontario, or as it's now known, the MyFM Centre. I have a bit of a story to tell, and it's not a very funny one, and it has to do with, quite a few things coming together for a bad result. But I do want to make sure that I mention something about small town elites. They exist everywhere, small towns right across Canada, across everywhere really. Where you have a group of people who are usually well off, they're usually influential rather, and they carry a lot of sway in their local communities with things that are near and dear to their hearts that they drag everybody else in with them. And I'm not suggesting totally that that's the case with Mattaway here, but I do believe that that played a significant role in the boondoggle that I've got behind me. First of all, when I moved to Renfrew 30 years ago, or over 30 years ago, 35 years ago in fact, one of the first things that really impressed me about this town was this place right here. I was a school teacher and I was bringing a softball team to play a softball tournament here, and they had such a terrific facility here. And another thing that really impressed me about it was the fact that they had named it Mattaway, which is of course an indigenous word. I'm going to assume Algonquin, but it could be perhaps from another nation. And I'm not quite sure what that means, but I think it has something to do with meeting place or some sort of gathering place or the coming together of a community, that sort of thing. So, I don't usually associate Renfrew as being a hotbed of Native issues or Native support or anything like that. I don't want to sell it short. That was my assumption. So to come into this place brand new and to see a place named after, using an indigenous word as its title was very impressive. And in fact, this roadway that's right beside here that runs in front of the former Mattaway Centre that goes out to the highway here is called Mattaway Drive. No idea if there's any movement afoot to change the name of that to match the name of the MyFM Centre as it is currently known. Anyways, back to 30 years ago. So I arrive in Renfrew, and you get your footing a little bit and you keep your ears open and you start to hear things about local politics. It's unavoidable. And at that time when I arrived, it was the pool that was a big controversy. So my apologies if I don't have this all completely correct. I'm trying the best that I can. I don't have any kind of script in front of me or anything, so I'm just sort of winging it, but I think I can probably manage and get quite close to the point that I'm trying to make here. And that point is that, what the hell's my point? This is what it's like to be a senior citizen here in the middle of a sentence. You can't remember what the hell. At least I remember my name and who I am. Small town elites, Mattaway Centre, named it after, plans afoot to change the name, etc. Anyways, so the big issue at that time was the idea of a community pool. And I guess from what I understand, an awful lot of money was raised in the community, and that money was going to be matched by either provincial or federal funding or both. And the idea would have been that at the end of that process, Renfrew would have had a swimming pool that likely would have been part of this facility behind me, as it was constituted back in 1989. Now, something happened with that money. I remember the reeve at that the mayor of Renfrew at that time was a woman by the name of Audrey Green. She lost her job as a result of all this, by the way. Of course, she went on to serve as reeve, which is another thing that I want to talk about, not Audrey Green, but the idea that there's such a position as reeve in a municipality such as Renfrew. Another thing I'd like to say right up front is I'm not a resident of Renfrew currently, but I did live here for over 30 years. I was a ratepayer. I wasn't a ratepayer back in 1989, so I didn't have too much skin in the game, so I didn't get really too bent out of shape one way or the other about the pool. However, I was cognizant of the fact that it was a big issue here in town. So anyways, whatever the story was, the money that was raised for the pool on a local level here, and apparently it was quite a substantial amount of money, was used for other purposes. And I can't really recall what, and I can't really recall what the rationale behind that might have been. But the long story short, that money that was raised by the community for the express purpose of building a pool here in Renfrew did not go to that purpose. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that anything untoward happened here. I'm just saying that there was a fundraising goal. The goal was apparently met, and the money, or the monies that were raised as a result of that fundraising, at the end of the day was not used for the purpose to which it was, set up in the first place. So that pool business has been a hot issue in Renfrew ever since. Now, it sort of simmered for a while and you didn't hear too much about it. And then I think it was back in the early 2000s that it started to raise its head again, where there was another push by local interest groups, stakeholders, that sort of thing, towards getting Renfrew a community pool. It was part of the reason, I'm not going to argue about the benefits of a pool. I mean, that much is obvious. But the thing of it is, pools are expensive and they have to be bought and paid for, and that money's got to come from somewhere, and that usually is a burden that's carried by the ratepayers or the taxpayers, and in this case, the ratepayers and taxpayers of the town of Renfrew. It looked good on the community, right? It was bragging rights to have a pool in your community. It was a sign of a progressive, forward-moving, growing community, and what community's not going to want a slice of that action, right? So I have absolutely no problem with anyone in their attempts to get a pool for this community. All fair as far as I'm concerned. Whether it happens or whether it doesn't is another thing. It's a little mix of politics, it's a big mix of money. But anyways, what you've got behind me is what you can get when you get a lot of people working at cross purposes with each other, and at the end of the day you sort of end up with a Frankenstein's monster, which was not exactly what we were hoping for. But anyways, those stakeholders and some of those elites, they weren't ready to watch their dreams fade into nothing here. So a lot of things happened, and a lot of things didn't happen that ought to have happened, that led to what's happening behind me right here. Now, it looks great and it's a fantastic building. I've not, in all honesty, been in it. I haven't seen what they have in there, but just from standing outside, you can certainly see that it's a big addition, of course, and I can only assume an improvement over what existed here before. So anyways, back to the early 2000s, there was this big push towards having a pool, and so the debate reignited once again. Sorry, the wind's picking up here. But at the same time, there was another group, almost a competitive group, that was looking for a second ice pad here in Renfrew. And that's an expensive proposition as well, but it's not nearly on the same scale as a swimming pool. And so those two groups lobbied back and forth with the local government here and for the voters, and they made it into a big issue, but they were almost at cross purposes with each other. I mean, the pool people wanted a pool, the second ice pad people wanted a second ice pad, and and neither one of them really gained any traction for several years. And I guess they, I don't know this for a fact, but I guess they came together at some point and they finally decided, look, we're not getting anywhere working on two separate different initiatives here. So why don't we just come together and marshal our forces, come together and present a united front, and maybe we can get both. And so, time kept going on, and so I think it was back around 2015, somewhere in there, in the mid-2010s anyways, where there was an election, and it was a pretty hotly contested one, and the pool and the ice pad were a big deal, and the pool primarily. And I don't know if there was a referendum of some sort, I can't recall. There may have been, there may not have been. But at the end of that day, whether it was through people expressing their opinions by the councillors that they elected, or whether they expressed their opinion as a result of a referendum of some sort or a survey of some sort, what eventually happened was the pool issue was put to bed. There would be no pool in the town of Renfrew, and the prohibitive cost of that venture was cited as the #1 reason. And of course, there's an awful lot of the constituency, the voters, the people here, who just believe, rightly or wrongly, that a pool was not the kind of thing that was most needed here in Renfrew. And if you've ever driven on our roads here, you'd understand that. There were other big expenditures like a water plant, a water filtration plant. There was stuff going on with Renfrew Hydro. There was all sorts of things that required all sorts of money. And so the people felt, and quite honestly, I was one of them, I was a ratepayer at the time, we felt that perhaps a pool was stepping too far, too fast, and it might hurt us down the road financially with the debt and of course the repayment of that debt. So the pool went down. In subsequent years, you can clearly see, behind me, well, you can't clearly see, but in that building that's behind me, there is a second ice pad. So I have to say that the people who are looking or lobbying for that probably are looking pretty good and feeling pretty good about their efforts because they've got the second ice pad. But the pool folks, the pool elites, they didn't get what they were looking for. So I guess that's the way it shakes out in local politics. Anyways, that was the history of the issue from the time I got to town in 1989 to the early 2000s to the mid-2010s. They're having an open house behind me here, and I guess blowing fire truck horns is a big part of the attraction. Hey, it got my adrenaline pumping, but anyways. So let's take a look at what's gone on in the last couple of years. So, the last town council, not the current one, but the one that existed before this, really undertook to get this thing, the plan to get this thing not only renovated but expanded to include an ice surface, a second ice pad, also to include meeting rooms, conference rooms, an indigenous center, more dressing rooms. Of course, you've got more of an ice surface. And so it was, that council came up with a number of $18 million as how much it would cost to institute or to have happen what they were hoping to have happen here at Mattaway. The only problem is that $18 million really didn't have any footing on solid ground. The number doesn't resemble anything that any consultant that I'm aware of came up with. And some of the tenders none of the tenders that came in met the 18,000, much less came in under, or 18 million, came in under the 18 million figure. So I really don't know where that $18 million figure came from or how it survived as much as it did, but the town of Renfrew, despite there are so many different ways of implementing oversight over decisions that represent millions of dollars of taxpayer money, and it seems like they were all thrown out the window. So, the town, the council would just not listen to anybody saying that, hey, listen, you know what? This is likely to cost somewhere in the area of $25 million, not $18 million, but the town would have none of it. They would have none of it. And so they went ahead and they applied for provincial grant money to support the cost of building this thing. And they quoted $18 million in their quote. And so the province did their bit. They took the $18 million ask, and what they did is they coughed up $11.6 or $11.8 million to be used towards the construction of this place. Well, that's just fine and dandy. That's great. That's great. So that means, according to my primitive standing on the grass out front of Mattaway mathematics, that means that taxpayers are going to be on the hook for somewhere in the area of $7 million. What with the province paying 11.8 and it costing 8 million or 18 million to build the place, according to town council. What's the harm in that, right? So as we move forward, they start building the place, and then all of a sudden there's cost overruns, and there's this and there's that, and it's just like it just becomes this major problem, and there is nobody exercising responsible local oversight over the people who were put in charge of this. And I don't want to get too specific here, because there could be a police investigation as a result of this. There could be, lawsuits and things like that. I don't want to tarnish the reputation of anybody. I don't know everything that there is to know, but I know this: it didn't cost $18 million, and it didn't cost $25 million. It cost $38 million. Okay, $38 million. And town council was there, and all the way through that process, they were asking questions like, what about the tendering? What about this? What about that? What about all these other things? The questions we're supposed to ask. And you know what they were told by the people who they put in charge, department heads? They were told, hey, you know what? It's all under control. We got it. We got this. You don't have to worry about that. You worry about catching dogs and making sure that the water and the hydro and all that stuff is working right. We'll take care of this. We got you. Well, they didn't got us. They didn't help us at all. And now the people of Renfrew are stuck with an extremely onerous debt burden as a result of this. Taxpayers in this community are going to be paying for this thing, and I'm sure it's a wonderful place, but they're going to be paying for this wonderful place for a long time, certainly well beyond my lifetime. I'm not a ratepayer in Renfrew anymore, but if I was, I would be absolutely furious and I would be demanding answers. But even those answers don't make any difference because the people who live here, they're stuck with this. There's nowhere to go. $38 million, that's $20 million over the town council estimate that nobody supported with any scientific data. Just pulled a number out of their ass is what they did. And so those people are all gone now, except one of them is now the mayor of the town. The newer councillors have sort of banded against him and have asked him to step aside and resign and amidst all of this, but he's not going anywhere, so that's fine. We'll see how he does politically later on, and I don't know. We'll see. You know, smarter people than me are going to look into this and investigate it, perhaps even the police, and at some point we'll get an idea of who's who and what's what. So anyways, that's 150% over budget? Wow. I mean, I know things never cost as much as we say they're going to cost. They always cost more. But over 100% more? Over double more? Come on. 18 million turns into 38 million. The people of Renfrew would have been on the hook for $7 million over how many years? It wouldn't drop in the bucket. But 38 million? Wow. That's a lot of money. That's more than a drop in the bucket. That's water coming through the ceiling. And so there's a big stink about this place right here. So I don't want to get too much into that, but I do want to ask you what was the process that led to this place being named the My FM Center? Now I understand naming rights, and I looked through the documentation, and here's how much these guys have to pay to stick their name on this, and I guess to get the #1 Primo parking space. I don't know if you can see that there, but there's the My FM vehicle right there in space #1. Hey, if it's got your name on it, you can park wherever the hell you want, right? But anyways, here's the breakdown for naming rights for this place. And ostensibly, it was put out there for anyone who wanted to bid on it, but they stated in the document that it would be awarded. I believe the language was, I might have to go back to the document to make absolutely sure, so I'm not going to say with 100% certainty that this is right, but it was going to be awarded on a first come, first serve basis. Remember how I was talking about local elites? You think they didn't, this is just me speculating, but do you think they had any idea that this naming business was going to happen and that it was going to be a first come, first serve and stuff like that? You think it's some of the same people involved in some of this stuff going on behind me here at Mattaway? Now My FM Center, but I don't want to call it My FM Center because I just don't feel right about it. So here's the breakdown on costs. Here's what it costs My FM, according to the documentation, to have their name slapped atop this thing. So, first of all, they have to pay $2,500, so $2,500 a year to contribute towards or pay for or something for an ice resurfacer. So I don't know what an ice resurfacer is, but it can't be a Zamboni because you're not getting a Zamboni for $2,500 anywhere I know, unless it's a yard sale or something like that. So I don't know what an ice resurfacer is, but if it costs $2,500, my computer costs more than that. So you know, it can't be anything. Is it something that you can get at Canadian Tire? I don't know. But anyways, they pay $2,500 for an ice resurfacer. They also pay $1,500 a year for conference rooms. Now there's one conference room, so 1 times 1,500, that's 1,500. So you're up to $4,000 a year so far. Plus, they have to, the people who are slapping their name on the building, have to pay $1,000 per dressing room. So now currently inside that building, as far as the document tells me, I haven't seen with my own eyes, there is 9 dressing rooms, so that's $9,000. So if you add it all up and you're out here in front of Mattaway and you're doing some primitive math, that sounds to me like they pay $13,000 per year to have their name on the building. Now that's a 10-year commitment. So they have committed up front to pay, I guess, $130,000 to have their name on that building and everything that that's part of that. And so the document actually canvassing or looking for people, nudge nudge, wink wink, to apply to have their name on this place, mentioned all the benefits that some corporate entity would have for having their name associated with this building. And they are many, and they are legitimate. And they are pretty much a steal at $13,000 a year, but this is a small town and I don't want to get too whacked out of shape here. You know, honestly, I don't really have any experience or, you know, I don't have the information as to how much or what's appropriate to take in for a community to, you know, give over your naming rights to a corporation or to a business. So, you know, and I'm not faulting My FM for this, but I'm just wondering if they, you know, it just looks a little too cute. Now maybe My FM's one of the only places in town that can cough up that kind of money over a 10-year period, but there are a lot of people in town who can cough that up no problem as individuals. So, and you know, some of them are associated with what's going on behind me here. So I refer to those elites once again. You gotta ask yourself, where do those elites, like, where do they all live? Do they live in the town, you know? Do they live in the town within the jurisdiction of the town? Do they pay any taxes? Do they have any skin in the game other than just being supporters of this, that, and whatever? Do they have to pay out of their pocket at all? So I worked that out on my calculator because I don't have the kind of mathematical brain that's going to help me here. But if this place costs $38.8 million and they got the naming rights for 10 years for $130,000, then that means that over that 10-year period, they have absorbed 0.003% of the cost of this place has been recouped by the naming rights over a 10-year period. 0.003%. Okay, so mind-boggling mathematics here for me. So I'm just going to use another example, and forgive me if it's not a great example, but I'm going to use the example of a new car. So we all got together and we decided to buy a brand new spanky new car, new truck, whatever. And let's just say, for the sake of mathematics, or ease of mathematics, that it cost $100,000. So we all chipped in, we all committed to pay whatever it cost to pay, whatever debt we needed to service, to pay for this new vehicle that we're buying. And then somebody came along and said, hey, listen, I'll give you 0.03% if you'll let me smash my name all over that car. And so that represents somewhere in the area of $300. So what group of people are going to buy a vehicle for $100 grand and let some clown come in for the cost of $300 over the course of 10 years, mind you, and they get to have their name all over our community taxpayer, well, not in this case, but, you know, the people coming together to buy the vehicle, they're the taxpayers in my community, or in my story here. Who would do that, right? So, you know, that is a drop in the bucket, and My FM and by the way, here's a little bit of an irony. It's called the My FM Center, and one of the places that are in there, one of the venues or the organizations that has either office space or conference room space, or they've got space in there, is an Aboriginal group of some sort, an Indigenous group. Well, isn't that wonderful? And then they took the name Mattaway off the place and they stuck My FM up there. sort of a little bit of a disconnect there, I find. But anyways, I don't live in Renfrew anymore, so I'm just here mouthing off because I got nothing better to do on a Saturday afternoon, right? We've got a situation here where, you know, I hate the word boondoggle. It's a word that conservatives use a lot to describe anything that, any crisis or any scandal they're not part of. So it's their favorite go-to word. But anyways, there's a big stink wafting behind me here. I'm happy that the facility exists. I think Renfrew deserves it. One thing you can look forward to, citizens of Renfrew, is that this place is going to grow. Take a look at Arnprior and see what happened there. This place is going to grow, maybe not at that speed or at that rate, but it will grow, and money will come into town. More people will come into town. More businesses will come into town. The tax base of the town will grow, and with more taxpayers, then that will lighten the load on paying for this thing. You know, and another thing too, you know, there's only two ways for the community here to make up that shortfall, or not the shortfall, but to make up for the exorbitant amount of additional money that's going to be required to pay for this. There's only two ways. You can raise taxes, or you can go into debt, or you can do both. And none of them are particularly politically popular as far as I understand. Another thing too, when you go into debt, and you know, they can only raise taxes so much before there's some sort of citizens revolt and the pitchforks and torches come out. But you know, with debt comes interest rates. You know, we've got to service that. It's not free money that we get to use. So you know, I'm just really happy that I'm not involved in town council, you know, and not that they had anything to do with it. It's the former town council that had its fingerprints on this. I just feel really good for a guy named Clint McWhorter, who lost, not this past election, but the election before. He lost by not very much, maybe 100 votes or so, a couple of hundred votes. It wasn't very much. And, you know, he would have had he overcome those 200 votes or so, he would have taken the last councillor's position. Well, my goodness, Clint, if there was ever a local election to lose, that was the one. So shake your hand and pat yourself on the back. You saved yourself a lot of misery there. Now, there's another guy that is part of the current council, that was part of the former council that was responsible for all of this, that had the task of performing due diligence and all of those responsibilities that come with being elected to municipal office. His name is Peter Eamon. He's the Reeve. And I really want to ask right now, what the hell does Renfrew need a Reeve for? What exactly does a Reeve do? Now, I know that Peter Eamon or any former Reeve or anybody with a vested interest can come up with, you know, anybody can make up anything. Here's what we need a Reeve for, blah, 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 and representation on county council. Okay. Why don't we send the mayor? Is the mayor busy that day, Pete? Or does it have anything to do with the fact that the office of Reeve has, you know, it almost looks like it's been used as a personal springboard to grab the chair and be the warden of Renfrew County, something he has been on more than one occasion, and it's clearly something that he likes to do, and it's clearly a chair he likes to sit in. And so, but that's great. Is there no other way for us here in Renfrew to have representation on Renfrew County Council without having a Reeve? That's a little redundant. Now, I don't know how much a Reeve makes, but holy smokes, man, I'm looking at something that was $20 million over budget. You know, getting rid of a Reeve isn't going to really help that all that much, but still, what do we need that position for? Now, what about the hospital? I mean, that's another issue here, and the allegation is that the people who are at the upper echelons of the hospital basically were hiding money from the provincial government. The provincial government gives so much money to a hospital in the province to be used for this or that or the other thing, but this particular money was used for primary care, or was intended to be used for primary care. And In the Renfrew Hospital, for some reason, I don't know, maybe they're well managed, maybe they execute their responsibilities and their mandate really well, but they ended up with what was looking like was going to be a surplus. And the province doesn't want a surplus. Okay, they're not running a business, they're running a hospital. And so they would have clawed that money back. So apparently, by the look of it, the hospital, upper echelon of the hospital, governance, they created an organization or a group called Health Renfrew, I believe it was called, and they put the surplus towards that group. So on the books, it showed the hospital spending money, but they were spending money on an organization that was attached to the hip to the hospital, but that wasn't providing primary care. It was more of a consultancy group, and it too was made up of local elites. You're responsible. If you're playing around with taxpayer money, you've got a responsibility to the taxpayer. And you also have an obligation to be transparent about it and to report about it to the taxpayer. And so, what we had here was a little bit of subterfuge where they were playing around with the books to show that they were spending all their money and they didn't have a surplus. And so the government didn't claw back the money. Now I understand, and it seems like, at face value it seems like a good idea, but folks, that's not the way it works, right? That money was for primary care, not for consultancy, not for a well-meaning group, I'm sure of it, who was going to serve as they weren't even an arm's length, they were working hand in glove. The director of the hospital here, if that's the title, sat on this Health Renfrew board. So what is it with local governance here? What do we have to start checking up on school boards now to see what they're doing and what they're doing with our money and that sort of thing? Hospital boards, we got local town council. I mean, how many rocks do we have to look under to make sure that our money, our tax money, which is hard earned, is being put to the uses that it's supposed to be? Okay, I'm Steve Jones. I'm standing in front of what I'm calling the Mattaway Activity Centre because I just like the feel of that, here in Renfrew, Ontario.